Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. We have a new guest coming to us from Eureka, Montana. He runs the very popular website altmarket.com. We have Brandon Smith on. Brandon Smith, welcome to USAWatchdog.com.
Hi, Greg. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you, too. I know you have a solutions-based website because of, what's going on is unparalleled in human history. You're a young guy, 32 years old. You've been doing on the Internet since 2006. Your website, altmarket.com, morphed from another website in 2010, alt-market.com. Real popular website on the Internet. You put out a lot of stuff. You write a lot of stuff. And this is the reason why I called you. In one of your last articles, you wrote about the final swindle of private wealth. And, that's one of the things I harp on with USA Watchdog. Again, Jamie Dimon and now 12 of his executives are being sued over the Bernie Madoff fraud. But tell me about the premise of the final swindle of private wealth. What's the idea behind that?
Well, it has a lot to do with the issue of the Federal Reserve taper of quantitative easing. So I would say that, first of all, I'd like to point out that at the end of last year, I brought up the prospect to the alternative economics community that the taper was real, that the Fed would indeed follow through and start cutting QE stimulus. And I received a pretty negative response from that concept, which is understandable because a lot of people in alternative economics and in the liberty movement, they're sort of focused on the concept of hyperinflation through fiat printing. And that's all they're kind of focused on. And I'm pointing out, through my articles on taper that, there's more than one way to kill the dollar. It's not just about printing. There's also the issue of debt default, and how that can kill the dollar's world reserve status and kill the dollar's value in the process. So the taper is a huge part of that process of debt default. I also pointed out that...
Well, wait. Why is the taper the huge part of it? Because a lot of folks that I talk to say, "Oh, they're going to print money till the cows go home," and some people said, "No, they're going to cut this back. They have to," and they were right, and you were right, incidentally. And so, why is the taper going to kill the dollar? A lot of people say, "Well, the dollar will be less of them, and the dollar will be stronger." Why is that?
Well, first of all, I find it interesting that the Federal Reserve instituted the taper just before we started to see major downturns in global manufacturing. The Baltic Dry Index is starting to crash again. We're starting to see trouble in emerging market currencies.
We are.
So I find it, you could say that maybe it's coincidence that the Federal Reserve instituted the taper right before that those negative indicators started to become visible. I don't think it's coincidence. I think they knew that those negative indicators were coming, that they were about to be made public, and the Fed is insulating itself using the taper concept. Basically, what that means is the Fed is pulling back its QE because they know that the effects of QE are diminishing. QE has a shelf life. Stimulus has a shelf life. Printing has a shelf life for its effectiveness in manipulating markets and propping up stocks. Okay? And I think we've hit the point where QE is no longer effective. The shelf life is over. And they're pulling that QE back now because they don't want it to be known to the public that QE has become ineffective, they don't want QE to be blamed for a stock market implosion. They don't want QE to be blamed for manufacturing implosion. So they're pulling it back, right? Because they know this downturn is coming.
Are they going to? Is that going to amplify it by pulling it back now? I mean, aren't they kind of? I was talking to Greg Manarino, and he says that they're doing this on purpose. They're going to cut the legs off underneath the market. and all their buddies are going to be on the short side, where the George Soroses, the J.P. Morgans, the everybody else has got these short positions out, and they know what the policy is. They know it's going to crash the market, and in doing so, they'll recapitalize the banks. Do you think that scenario holds water?
I think that, yes, I think that a taper would be part of a downturn, especially in emerging market currencies and in global manufacturing, because a lot of the taper, as we found with the only audit of TARP, which thanks to Ron Paul that occurred, we saw that around $16 trillion of Federal Reserve fiat was going into foreign markets. So I could see it affecting foreign markets quite a bit, but I think that ultimately the Fed is not necessarily pulling back from QE because they want to cut the legs out from under the market. I think the market is losing its legs regardless. And they're pulling QE back because what happens if we have a stock market implosion while stimulus is running? Who gets blamed?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Then people think, well, if all this money printing doesn't work, then we're doomed. And then it's a full-blown panic. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying the Fed is removing a QE as part of the equation because they know an implosion is going to happen and they don't want to be blamed.
As being ineffective, and hey, look, you said this would work and it didn't, and so you think another $10 billion is coming out of the market in the next meeting. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, in fact, there's a couple Fed hawks that are calling for QE to end by summertime, by July. So they're looking to end this, I believe, probably by the end of the year, but maybe even faster.
Well, I know you write a lot about the economy, you write a lot about social issues, and let's stay on the economy vein and the gold vein, because I know you write about that as well. And so for all the people in the alternative news market which complain to you about QE and, oh my gosh, they're going to keep printing till the cows come home, and you say they're not. But you say that it's still going to destroy the dollar, and so how does that affect gold and silver in your mind?
Well, I would see the issue of I think forex markets and the emerging market currencies. I think the fact that that the Fed pullout is sort of affecting the value of those currencies, and people are in the investment market are going to start looking for alternative hedges to these currencies dropping in value. I think that the U.S. debt issue is going to be very big this year.
Explode.
Yes.
Yes. You think the U.S. debt explodes in this year?
I believe that we will see, when the historians look back on 2014, they will say that this was the year where it all started. It may not be as fast as we might expect. We might not get into Mad Max territory for a while, or we may never get there. In fact, I think that really where all of this is headed is debt default by the United States, followed by intervention by the IMF using what they have is a global currency called the SDR. And I believe that the IMF will intervene in U.S. Treasuries. In fact, it's interesting because China has always been the crutch for U.S. debt. Well, they've been a crutch for a long time, and they've allowed our debt spending to continue. Now that they've started pulling back, we've seen China essentially end new dollar purchases for their forex markets, for their forex reserves. We've seen, I believe, just last month we saw one of the biggest dumps by China of U.S. Treasuries.
That's right.
The second largest, I believe. And so that crutch is no longer in existence. The Chinese are obviously pulling back. Then we had the Federal Reserve as the primary crutch for U.S. Treasuries. That's what QE has been mostly about, has been supporting U.S. Treasuries and U.S. debt spending. Now, with the taper, they're pulling back. So what's going to happen? Who fills the gap for purchasing U.S. Treasuries if the Fed is pulling back? Well, there's two sources of capital that would fill that gap. First, you have Belgium coming in just recently to be one of the largest purchasers of U.S. Treasuries. just this past month. Belgium is the political center of the European Union, and Belgium recently, well, around 2012, they received quite a bit of cash from the IMF to start injecting into what they said were low-income economies. But you have the IMF working through Belgium to pump money essentially into U.S. treasuries. You also have one other option, which is the American people. And I believe that that's the whole purpose of Barack Obama's new what they call MyRA program,
the
MyRA program. Yes, which is I think a con game to force the American public into purchases of treasuries, of U.S. treasuries. And I find it interesting that they just raised the minimum wage requirements at the same time that they issue this MyRA program. Why do you think they raised the minimum wage? Maybe because they want to steal that money from all these paychecks in order to forcefully invest into the MyRA, to forcefully invest into U.S. treasuries.
And let's get back to the final swindle. The final swindle comes from people having their retirement accounts basically confiscated by the government, saying, hey, I've been saying this to people. We can't have the USS Kitty Hawk floating around in the Arabian Ocean out of fuel and out of ammunition, and we're not going to let that happen, and you keep your retirement. Is that what you're saying? Is that what the final swindle of private wealth is all about? Is the government sucking up everything to stay afloat?
Yes, I think it's about cornering the last vestiges of private American wealth into the U.S. Treasury market and then cutting the legs out from under the Treasury market, and thereby destroying what few people out there are left in the middle class that can support themselves and deal with a economic collapse situation.
You think we're going to have an economic collapse?
I do.
Describe.
I think it will be not what we expect. I don't think it'll be a cinematic, full-on, fast-moving collapse. You wake up one morning and everything's gone. I think what it will be is a sort of slow to medium speed collapse in which we lose a considerable percentage of the value of the dollar. We'll see major price hikes in necessary goods, food, electricity, energy, all of that. And I think eventually, the ultimate goal is to have the IMF move in and take over the U.S. economy, management of the U.S. economy.
Whoa, that means no Constitution, no Congress, no president, no Supreme Court. I mean, it guts our power structure. Is that what you're telling me?
Exactly. I think that the UN and the IMF will probably work hand in hand once the U.S. system collapses in order to rebuild. And you'll see, I don't think you'll see a total destruction of American wealth. You'll still have some American wealth, but they'll be buying up that wealth for pennies on the dollar once we have a default, once we have an economic default. That's what we're looking at here.
Is that why they want to take away, because we had a record year of people buying guns last year, so there's a counter force to that. I mean, is that why you think they want to basically get control of firearms? It's not about our safety, it's about their safety.
Yes, I think they tried very hard to get our firearms with this last, with the Sandy Hook tragedy, and it's interesting, they failed rather miserably in order to get the any kind of SAFE Act style legislation through on a federal level. And I would say that true gun confiscation will probably occur later after the IMF and the UN move in to take charge of the U.S. economic system. Right. I think they'll demand that, and I think that's what the whole small arms treaty, UN's small arms treaty, is about. I think they'll move in to support the U.S. economy, but at the same time they'll say
they're planning down the road. Oh, we have this treaty. Give up your guns.
Yes. I think they'll say, well, in order to implement our aid within your country, you need to follow these specific guidelines. And I believe the Small Arms Treaty will be a part of those guidelines.
Well, so far they're not getting that through the Senate.
No.
I mean, are the senators going to want to give up their power? Is Congress going to want to give up their power? I mean, is everybody bought off up there in Washington in your mind, or do we at some point people decide to start really giving some pushback?
I think the majority of Congress and the Senate, I think there is essentially bought and paid for. I think the majority of them. There are some good legislators in Washington, but for the most part, I think they'll go along with any kind of IMF revamping program, a rebuilding program for the United States.
Whoa, that's pretty scary. And what's your timing on all this? I've been in my mind, I've been thinking this is another setup from 2007, 2008, 14 and 15, but on steroids. In other words, 2014 may be worse, way worse than 2007, and 2015 may be off the charts from 2008. What do you say? What's your timing?
Right. Well, I've never seen the amount of potential trigger events in the global economic system. I've never seen so many in the time that I started writing for the Liberty Movement. I thought it was bad back in 2008. I can't, if you had gone to me back in 2008 and said, well, we may be on the verge of World War III in the Ukraine or in Syria or between China and Japan, I might not have believed it. I might not have believed it because everything has moved so fast in the past. I would say in the past 2 years. It's unbelievable. I mean, Syria was a huge near miss. A huge near miss.
The Russians were flooding the eastern Mediterranean, and the president backed down. I mean, I think they were going to go. I mean, any war? Do you see any war not being nuclear in the future? I mean, if Israel attacks Iran, if Iran attacks Israel, if the Russians say, "Hey, we've had enough with you meddling in the Ukraine, that's on our border, and we can't have that." I mean, do you see that there's how much of a possibility do you think is there for a nuclear war in the next war?
I think there's a very good possibility of limited exchange or limited use of nuclear weapons. I don't know that the banking elites want a full exchange just because I think they want the earth nice and pristine for themselves.
They got to have a place to live too, don't they?
Yeah. So I do believe within my lifetime, probably in the near term, I will see mushroom clouds over particular hotspots in the world. I do believe that I will see that.
You're a young guy. I just want to bring this up. I'm having you on because I have older folks on, but I have younger folks too. But you are 32 years old, and I want to get your read on what other people your age, in their late 20s and early 30s, are they worried? Are they freaking out? Do they understand the very dire, unprecedented, never happened before in human history? Do they understand what's going on? I know you do.
I think Ron Paul had a huge effect on the younger sort of conservative or constitutional crowd. Thanks to him, there was an explosion of interest amongst people my age in the economic situation, in police state developments, all of that. I think he had a huge effect. However, Ron Paul, college age and beyond, Ron Paulers are still a minority in the country. Amongst those people, there's a huge amount of awareness. But outside of the Ron Paul movement, outside of the Liberty movement, it's night and day. Most people my age honestly couldn't care less. They believe that if something bad happens, then they'll just deal with it when it happens. They don't want to have to think about it. They want to have fun and just live their lives while they can. And I've talked to a lot of people my age who sort of bring that argument up. Well, I just want to live my life, and then if something bad happens, then it happens. They don't really understand the concept of preventing a crisis situation from occurring or a disaster from occurring. They just want to ignore it and have fun.
And finally,
and that's where we're at.
And finally, 2014. Now we're talking about these dire things. You think so? In 2014, what does the rest of 2014 look like in your mind? What do you think is going to happen this year? I mean, do you think we have a big explosion in the gold price? Do you think we have a big sell-off in the dollar? What do you think? Or do we have a repeat of 2013, which is that, kind of just nothing really happened?
I think we'll see an increase initially in U.S. Treasury investment, just because a lot of the markets, I believe the stock market will see a considerable devaluation, possibly, I would say between 10 to 15% devaluation by summer. Then we're looking at investment in treasuries, which will sort of pick up the dollar value for a while. But ultimately, I think in 2014 we'll see a debt downgrade, a credit rating downgrade of the United States. I think we will see another one in this year, in 2014. And that will affect interest rates, that will affect dollar value and treasury value. And from then on, it's just a matter of how many sort of cover events or trigger events will we have geopolitically before the dollar collapses. We could see a conflict between China and Japan. It seems like we're edging towards that rather quickly. We could see major tensions between Russia and the U.S. over the Ukraine. Syria is still on the table. Iran is still on the table. North Korea is still on the table. And it's just a matter of which trigger will the elites use to cover the otherwise obvious collapse of the economy. And the reason they would use a trigger event, I think, is they don't want the blame. They don't want the blame for any collapse of the U.S. system. So they need a war or a major terrorist attack, some kind of black swan event. They need something to cover a collapse of the U.S. system.
You think it happens this year, 14?
I believe we'll see a trigger event in 2014. I believe we'll see a considerable devaluation of U.S. stocks and the beginnings of the collapse of the dollar in 2014.
Gold, silver?
Silver, way up this year. Gold, I think silver will be the better performer. Gold will go up quite a bit. I don't want to give a number, but I could say, I would say, I'll give you a percentage. I would say probably 20 to 30% up this year.
For gold
and silver.
For gold and silver?
Silver probably more.
All right. I got to thank you. I'm glad to have you on as a new guest. I hope you come back. Brandon Smith, the website alt-market.com, very popular website on the internet. Brandon Smith, alt-market.com. Thank you so much for giving us your take on the final swindle of private wealth.
Scott.
Thank you very much for coming on USA Watchdog.
Thanks for having me.